Again, my name is Kulsum Rifa. I am a junior at the City College of New York. I am an aspiring optometrist, but I advocate for environmental and more specifically climate justice on the side for as a hobby, but also because I think it's my responsibility. And as Elid kind of explained, I happen to come from a background of people who are affected most by climate change, even though we're the one who contributed the least to cause it. According to EPA, environmental justice is the fair treatment and involvement of all people, like me, the people who were affected firsthand because of climate change and environmental changes. When it comes to enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. Talking about environmental justice, today we're joined by three amazing environmental justice leaders. First, we have amazing Casey Charles-Guzman, who is the Deputy Director of New York City Mayor de Blasio's Office of Sustainability. She's the person who worked from behind the scene. Many of us might not know her, but she's our girl. She's the one who's working from behind the scene to respond to anticipated adverse health impacts associated with changing climate. So thank you so much for being with us today. And one fun fact, in 2013, Ms. Charles-Guzman was awarded the EPS Region 2 Environmental Quality Award in recognition for her outstanding work for New York City. But think about it, it's for all of us, not just New York City, but the whole country. Um, Without further ado, I'll have her speak. But before I do that, I would like to also introduce our other panelists. We have Kyla Mensa, who is the Senior Manager Environmental Justice and Sustainability at the New York Power Authority. Ms. Mensa works to improve the environment in undereducated communities for large state public electric utility in the country. And one of her main goals is to reduce STEM achievement gap for underrepresented group. And lastly, we have Peggy Shepard, who is the executive director of We Act for Environmental Justice. And Ms. Shepard has been involved in organizing environmental protection for a while, since the 80s. How cool is that? That's 20 years before I was born. And she was the first female chair of National Environmental Justice Advocacy Council to the US Environmental Policy Agency. Wow. I don't know if you guys are freaking out by hearing about them, because when I was doing research, I was like, whoa, I have the honor to introduce them. Thank you so much for being here. I want the participants to keep in mind that we have a Q&A session, and as they're speaking, you may ask questions on the Q&A session. And Ms. Kizzy Guzman could start.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me, but also thank you for joining. It's exciting to see so many of you here. Again, my name is Kizzy. That was an awesome introduction. Thank you for that. I am the Deputy Director for Social and Environmental Policy at the New York City Mayor's Office of Sustainability. My work in city government, whether it was in air quality or climate or sustainability, has always been focused on trying to translate the best available climate, environmental, and social science to develop policies and programs that improve New York City neighborhoods, and of course, to advocate for capital projects that address New York City needs. I think also importantly, my work and leading my teams, we've always really centered redressing the effects of systemic inequality and racism by targeting the work that we do in historically underserved and underinvested communities. And I do this because I went to high school and I still live right here in Crown Heights in Brooklyn, and I grew up there in the 90s. And the environmental quality of life that we enjoy in my community today took years of advocacy and investment to achieve. So I'm really proud to contribute to this movement. I'll just use a couple of examples to tell you a bit about what I work on, but I also want to give a shout out to Peggy because I, of course, started my career at We Act for Environmental Justice, and she has always been someone that I look up to. So hi, and thank you for all the support you've given me in my career. So just wanted to give two quick examples about my work, which I was asked to do. And the first one I want to share is about heat. And so when we look at a thermal imagery map of New York City, which is about temperature, right? Surface temperatures, we see that cooler areas are places like our parks, right? Our open spaces, our water bodies. And then places that are much warmer are areas like our airports and like highly dense places. So what we know, right, is that in New York City, key drivers of heat impacts are things like traffic and infrastructure and waste heat sources like industrial sites. So what's really clear is that neighborhood and building characteristics make heat-related risks worse for some populations like the elderly. And the New York City Panel on Climate Change projects that by the 2050s, the number of days in New York City above 90 degrees will triple. And we're facing a warmer and wetter future climate with more extreme events of all kinds. And the thing is that in New York City, like in many other parts of the country, extreme heat is a present danger, not just a future risk. And indoor temperatures can be up to 20 degrees higher than outdoor temperatures without air conditioner. And that means that New York City sees about 130 direct and indirect heat-related deaths and about 600 emergency department visits and hospitalizations every summer. Now, each of these deaths was preventable. And so I had the impetus to develop a plan that had health and racial equity at its core, right? So in service of that, I led the development of Cool Neighborhoods NYC, which is the city's first adaptation strategy to extreme heat and future heat waves. And it's divided into strategies, right? The first set of them is what we call mitigation strategies. It's highlighting the role that the physical environment plays in driving local temperatures. And it describes the investments that the city has to make to increase shade, so trees and greenery and canopy cover, and also to increase high albedo surfaces, so like light color surface and public and private sites, to help lower surface and indoor temperatures in our neighborhoods so that we can lower vulnerability to heat, illness, and mortality. But high temperatures also threaten New Yorkers inside of their homes today, and they will continue to do that in the future. So Cool Neighborhoods also addresses a second set of strategies that we call adaptation, right? And so that is underscoring the critical role that our most trusted messengers can play in helping us adapt to climate change. And those are community organizations, our home health aides, community health workers, health and weather reporters, right? Our first informers. You know, they have all been demonstrated as our trusted messengers, those that New Yorkers listen to and trust in communities across New York City, but also across America. So a big part of that is partnering so that we have the right people deliver health protective messages to New Yorkers to keep them safe. Now, why am I telling you about Cool Neighborhoods? The thing is that this is the first ever city strategy to address the impacts of rising temperatures and heat waves. It's not a perfect plan. It's not a static plan, but it's a place to start. You can easily find it online, but what I want to share about it is that it targets $106 million in city investment to heat vulnerable and historically underserved communities. And so since we launched the plan in 2017, our Parks Department has been planting trees strategically along the city streets and small parks, targeting heat vulnerable neighborhoods such as the South Bronx and Northern Manhattan and Central Brooklyn. And of course, you can imagine that the benefits of greening go way beyond heat, right? They, aside from relieving stress and providing shade, creating cool corridors, they also have many social and health co-benefits. So another big piece of this is safety and just improving the way that the neighborhood looks. And then finally, I do want to highlight one last program, which is about buildings, right? So buildings are responsible for over 70%, almost 70% of the city's greenhouse gas emissions, and almost half of those emissions all come from 2% of buildings. So in 2019, the city passed Local Law 97, which requires large buildings in New York City to meet strict greenhouse emissions standards and limits starting in 2024, and they become more strict over time. So anyways, this is the first law of its kind anywhere in the country and in the world, and it makes us a leader in trying to get to deep decarbonization of our buildings. By 2030, we expect that this law will reduce emissions from large buildings across the city by over 6 million tons, which is the equivalent of taking 1.3 million cars off the road, creating thousands of green jobs in the process and preventing about 130 premature deaths annually from local air quality improvements. So I'm excited about being part of a team that is really putting buildings on a path to net zero emissions by 2050, and that we're constantly just thinking about how we can protect New Yorkers and think about affordability and think about existing buildings as well as new construction. So I'll stop here for now, but thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I want to remind the attendees that there is a Q&A session. If you have any questions, please go ahead and ask them. Next, Ms. Mensa could go ahead and introduce herself.
Thank you very much. So my name is, can everyone hear me? Okay, perfect. So good morning, my name is Kyla Mensa, and I'm the Senior Manager of Environmental Justice at the New York Power Authority. The Power Authority, or NYPA, is the largest state public utility. We were created to generate and transmit electricity for New York State. And so our customers are large public entities like the MTA, the City of New York, the public housing authorities like NYCHA and other public housing authorities. We generate approximately 25% of New York State's electricity, and 80% of our generation is hydropower. So we have 16 statewide facilities and thousands of miles of transmission lines. Most of our power is generated upstate in Niagara Falls, in northern New York on the border with Canada, in central New York. And we also have some facilities in New York City as well. We supply low-cost hydropower to businesses in exchange for a commitment and retention of local jobs. And so we use some of the power and the generation that we have for economic development. Some of our customers are Con Edison and National Grid. So we generate power, and then we sell it to them, and then they in turn sell it to the residential customers. But as I said, the generation and the income that we generate is for economic development. And one of my roles at the Power Authority is to reach out to students like CUNY students and also to other communities to develop educational programs that really build capacity and knowledge for communities so that they understand all the different impacts of some of the operations that we are engaged in. And so I like to talk about some of the programs that we have so that students, in particular, when I'm talking to students at the college level, so that they're aware of the different careers that are going to be needed in order to meet the extensive legislation, clean energy legislation that both New York State and New York City are embarking in. So one of the programs I'd like to highlight is NYPA's Evolve New York program, and that's a program where we're building a network of electric vehicle charging along major highways and airports. We're involved also in public transportation and electrification projects at the MTA and other state-wide transit. We installed energy efficiency projects, and we recently announced a number of projects, over 40 community solar projects and installations at JFK and at New York City Public Schools. We also help our customers like the SUNYs and the CUNYs meet some of the legislation that Kizzy mentioned. And so we implement energy efficiency projects. We try and try and help them in their clean energy goals and missions to ensure that they're able to meet some of the legislation that's coming out of New York City and New York State. And I just wanted to highlight one project I'm particularly excited about. NYPA is involved in a nationwide research project to explore the intersection between electricity and indoor food production. So my department, I have a staff of environmental scientists. And so what we did was we mapped out the food deserts in New York State, and we put these indoor food production systems in residents where the food deserts are. And it's no surprise to understand that the food deserts are also correlated to where the environmental justice and the frontline communities are. So as part of this project, residents are receiving fresh food and vegetables that's locally grown with a low carbon footprint. And this project monitors what the electricity electricity and water impact is and how growing food locally will impact climate change. And so we're growing kale, and we're partnering with a community-based organization, which is a food bank, so that they're providing food free of charge to the communities that surround them. NYPA is also involved in storm recovery support. As you know, with climate change, there's going to be many more extreme weather events. And so when Puerto Rico's electric system was completely destroyed by Hurricane Maria, 2 days after Maria hit, NYPA engineers and union workers were boots on the ground to help bring power back online. In total, we sent over 400 personnel, and some of them are still there helping to redesign and build the electric grid. And so I mentioned some of these careers because it's going to take a whole new range of skills and understanding of technologies that are going to be able to meet the clean energy goals as we transition to clean energy. One of the things that we're doing at NYPA is really building kind of a digital utility. And so we've built these digital twins so that we can understand and model and do research as new energy, clean energy comes online, solar energy, wind energy, wind technology. We're going to understand and model what it means for the transmission. Where does the transmission need to be as electrification, like electric vehicles, come online? What's the impact to resiliency, and what are the skills that we need? And so that's the type of thing that I'm involved in. I build K-12 programs for students in middle school, trying to make sure that they understand what the new jobs of the future are going to be. We work with communities to create adult literacy programs so that they understand some of the things that they can do within their own homes to be able to save money on their electricity bills. And we also try and act as an internal voice for community members. We work with different community groups so that we can bring back their concerns and ensure that NYPA, as they deploy the programs and strategic programs, that they have a voice, and we're kind of the internal advocate to ensure that they're embedding and have frontline community concerns at the front line of their minds as part of their DNA when they deploy these programs. So more recently, we embarked on a racial justice DEI agenda that really tries to ensure that the career pathways that are being built to deploy this clean energy are inclusive of more of a diverse workforce and inclusive of residents of environmental justice communities. So I'll stop there and we can continue.
All right, thank you so much for sharing. I'll go ahead and have Ms. Shepard speak now.
Certainly. Good morning, everyone. I thought I'd start by just defining environmental justice, because you can't have climate justice without environmental justice. And so EJ, as we call it, environmental justice, is a civil rights analysis of environmental decision-making. It's discrimination in the enforcement of laws, the deliberate targeting of communities of color for toxic waste disposal and industrial facilities. It's the permitting of polluting facilities in already overburdened communities. And it's also the exclusion of people of color from staff and boards of mainstream environmental groups, decision-making boards, and regulatory bodies. It's really a system of power, of formal and informal structures within government, nonprofits, and philanthropy that really assigns value to certain groups and communities. And as Dr. Robert Bullard says, we do not have the complexion for protection. So my organization began, We Act for Environmental Justice, back in 1988 in Harlem as a result of community struggles around sewage treatment plants and the proliferation of bus depots in Uptown communities. So our strategy and theory of change is that we can build healthy communities by organizing and engaging affected residents in environmental decision-making through the methods of organizing, membership development, leadership training, community-based research, advocacy, policy development, and movement building. And so we already know that communities of color and Indigenous peoples are more vulnerable to climate change because they're often the first and worst hit by extreme weather events that exacerbate the legacy of existing pollution and environmental degradation in their communities. Now, we know that these events expose their lack of financial ability, family resources to be resilient in the face of adversity, such as heat waves, which we've heard from Kizzy, Charles-Guzman, are increasing in length and intensity, and also storm surge and flooding. And so in addition, as we switch to alternative fuels away from fossil fuels, we have to address the increase in energy insecurity being experienced by over 30 million households in this country today. And that was actually before COVID. 30 million households before COVID were already energy insecure, could barely pay their energy bills, rent, and other kinds of costs. So we know that COVID has increased that insecurity as a result. So what we decided to do was to really build community resilience after Hurricane Sandy. We began to recruit 400 residents in Northern Manhattan, East, West, Central Harlem, Washington Heights, and Inwood to develop a Northern Manhattan climate action plan, which really prioritized energy democracy and energy justice. So as a result, we began to work on extreme heat with New York City. We know that 50% of the heat-related deaths in the city are Black New Yorkers, though they comprise only 25% of the population. We are also continuing to work on cooling centers, signage, and making recommendations as to how they might serve our residents better. To also address energy insecurity, we partnered with Solar One and the Urban Homesteading Assistance Board to launch a program called Solar Uptown Now. The acronym is SUN. And it's designed to bring solar energy to affordable housing in Northern Manhattan neighborhoods and to create local jobs by training unemployed and underemployed residents to do the solar installations as part of our worker training program. So currently the program has installed solar panels on the roofs of 13 HDFC buildings in Northern Manhattan. HDFC buildings are tenant-owned cooperatives. That's a really good way to fight gentrification by keeping housing more affordable through energy bills, which are, a huge cost for housing. And so we have now done the 13 HDFCs and annually producing 415 kilowatts of renewable energy while avoiding 802 pounds of nitrogen oxide, which is a leading source of air pollution and a contributor to global warming. So by offsetting the electricity needed for the common areas of these buildings, the program can save residents an estimated $61,000 in the first year and an estimated $1.9 million over the 25-year lifetime of the installations. And over 100 members of the community have been trained as certified solar panel installers, which really opens a pathway for them to build careers in the emerging green economy. Another program we're working on is called Community Power. It's a partnership with Solar One, Con Edison, Green City Force, and the New York City Community Energy Cooperative. And we're installing solar panels on the roofs of buildings in Carver Houses, which is NYPA public housing, over in East Harlem. And we're working with Green City Force to recruit underemployed tenants from those developments to do the solar installations. And so nearby Con Ed customers living in low to moderate income housing will be able to join the New York City Community Energy Cooperative and enjoy savings on their electric bills while helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And we're calling that community shared solar. We're also advocating at the state and federal level for something called green zones as a way to address the legacy of pollution in frontline communities. And a green zone would tackle these problems through targeted tax credits, incentives, and initiatives can really escalate the transition from fossil fuels to renewables reduce greenhouse gases, address legacy pollution, improve air quality, and create green jobs and worker cooperatives. So, we see the focus areas within a green zone, including energy affordability, clean heating, green business, jobs, urban greening, and cleaner transit and transportation. One last project I would talk about is our out of gas pilot. So we are working with a statewide coalition. Was called Out of Gas. It's now called Building Better Buildings. And within that, we have a pilot project called Out of Gas. And it's a project where we are recruiting 20 households in New York City and 20 in Buffalo. We're working with Push Buffalo there. And we're swapping out gas stoves for electric induction stoves and heat pumps so that we can demonstrate the cost to tenants, because the bill could rise. And so we might need, in terms of public policy, to figure out how to subsidize those bills for lower income residents. We also want to demonstrate the improved indoor air quality, because recently the Rocky Mountain Institute has done a report that shows with gas stoves, you can have 10 times higher indoor pollution than you actually have outdoors. So it could be a very big improvement for indoor air quality and for those who have asthma or other kinds of pulmonary issues. So environmental justice and climate justice really depends on community resilience. I think every community and neighborhood in New York City should develop a community resilience plan. And I would hope the city would adopt that goal because I think that's really important, and it's a way to get people really understanding the issue, what it means to them in their everyday lives and in their neighborhoods. And so community resilience, sustainable community development is going to be really important as we move forward to ensure that all of our communities have the equity that they deserve and are getting the resources that they need. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So we all have recognized that climate change affects different community different way, but sometimes I feel like this topic becomes, rather than a human justice issue, it becomes like about politics. How can we make sure that policies are being passed in national, state, and local level to address climate justice?
Well, one way is that regular people like you and like many of the students who are listening in need to volunteer to begin to work with groups all over the city that are doing this kind of work. They need to begin to make recommendations. For instance, I chair the New York City Environmental Justice Advisory Board, and we have a website where we are soliciting suggestions and recommendations from regular people all over New York City about the concerns they have around environmental justice and policies they think that we need to adopt. So there are coalitions all over the city. New York Renews worked to develop one of the boldest climate action pieces of legislation in the country, called the Climate Protection Community Leadership Act. There are committees that are working groups that will be advising the implementation of the law. Those working groups are public. So anyone on this call right now can log in and listen to those working groups and can make recommendations. So there's so many ways that we can get involved. Also, groups like mine all over the city need interns. And interning is a great way to begin to understand the kind of place you want to work. You get a chance to intern at lots of different kinds of places. You could probably intern at the city or the power authority or with a grassroots community group. And that will give you an opportunity to know, do I want to work for a nonprofit? Do I want to work in government? And it also gives you an opportunity to really hone your skills and learn a whole new set of dynamics around these issues.
I just quickly wanted to add, if I may. So thank you for that, Peggy. And I did answer a similar question in the Q&A. So take a look. Some of the organizations listed there are really at the forefront of the conversation on environmental issues in New York City, and volunteering and interning and working for them, or following their work and contributing to their campaigns are ways that you can get involved. The one thing I want to add, though, is that there's another critical way that you keep governments accountable, and that is by voting. If you can vote, or by organizing to help people who can vote if you can't. So I spent many years where I was not a US citizen, but I was knocking on doors trying to get people registered. And I think that that is one area where people can say, you know, our elected officials are supposed to represent our interests, right? Like we televise now through Zoom all of our city council hearings. People can testify at these hearings. They can come in and give us their opinion, right? And so that's another way that you can participate. But I think at the end, you know, politicians respond to their constituencies, and if you're available and able to vote, please show up. And if you are not, then please help those that are, so that we can get to more progressive environmental action, including getting involved in organizations like the Sunrise Movement, who are doing a tremendous effort to get young people registered to vote.
I would also add that I'm a strong believer in grassroots effort to raise awareness and become a catalyst for change. The attention that's generated by young people advocating for change is what's moving government and moving industry. I would encourage you to learn about environmental justice and how it affects your own community. I studied engineering and then environmental science, and I think that when I was studying, there weren't any courses about environmental justice. There was, I think, an ethics elective that I could take. And so I was really excited at the opportunity to bring my engineering and technical skills and to marry them with my passion for empowering communities. I'm African. I was born in Southern Africa, so I fully understand, Kulsum, what you were talking about in terms of the impact of environmental justice and of climate change and climate on the most vulnerable people. And as a professional working in this utility and clean energy space, I think we take for granted terms we throw around: renewable energy, climate justice, just transition. But what underpins those terms? You know, what we found in some of our community programs is that there's a strong need for community education, just to understand the technology and the science. And I think that sometimes we speak at this level, but then we have to bring everyone along in understanding the technology. How does a battery work? I mean, we talk about solar, we talk about wind, and we started it in programs for middle school to high school, and then we found that the adults also need to be brought along. You know, we talk about LED street lighting, we talk about, and sometimes it's, you know, what's your energy bill? And, you know, Peggy mentioned energy vulnerability and you know, it's just energy equity, trying to just explain and understand the science and trying to bring communities along and empower our communities so that they understand exactly what these policies mean. That's where I think that there's a need for that community education. And so I'm really excited to be working in this space at the moment because of that.
Thank you. We have time for one more questions. So once you are involved in climate justice, let's say a group, nonprofit group, sometimes you realize that the biggest emitters and the polluters tend to be, they're less affected, but they're also in the table of policymaking. I was at the first UN Youth Climate Summit, and to me, it kind of felt like a photo op to show that, hey, we care. But Shell and other big emitters, they were at the table for policymaking. How would you encourage the youth to get involved when you know that big money talks?
Well, you know, big money talks, but voters vote. And elected officials are concerned about people who live in their districts voting for them. So if you show up on lobby day, if you show up and knock on the door of the district office of your elected official and tell them what's what, they're going to listen to you. Yes, big money makes a difference, but the vote makes a bigger difference.
I also just want to add, you guys, that you really can't come at this from that perspective. It is your world. Like, you are going to be stuck with this mess we're making every day and that we've been making for decades, right? And the fact of the matter is that frontline youth, like young people, have always been at the forefront of climate, social justice, racial justice movement, social change. When you think about the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, you know, the Black Lives Matter, Standing Rock, like young people have been at the forefront. And so I hate to think about young people feeling like they have no agency, because they do, right? They have always had agency. They've had a voice. Is the voice the same as, you know, Exxon? No, but you know what? Like, you have to show up, right? Like, again, I went to high school in Brooklyn. I could have just, you know, become a doctor or a lawyer like my parents wanted me to. At the end, if I wanted to see the difference in my community that I wanted to see, I needed to roll up my sleeves and get involved, right? I volunteered at We Act for a year, you know, before I ever got a job. And I think that it's really important to really identify the organizations, the coalitions, the youth organizers that are doing so much, putting in so much effort, and get involved with them. I don't think that the only path is through academics and through careers. That's wonderful. And I see a lot of questions in the chat about that. So maybe we can take a few minutes to talk about that. But at the end, what you do in your day job could also be different than what you do on your weekend, right? And I think that fighting for social justice is something that all of us do because it's the right thing. And we do it at nighttime, we do it on the weekend, we do it on our vacations. And that's what you have to do too. It's your world, you're stuck with it.
I would wholeheartedly agree with that. I think it's heartening that climate inequity is increasingly at the heart of climate negotiations and policy, both globally, statewide, and New York City-wide. Peggy Shepard mentioned CLCPA, which is a landmark legislation really written and authored by advocacy groups. And I think that it's got aggressive climate and energy goals, but there is an acknowledgement that there's a clear and specific need to prioritize the benefits and technology for frontline communities. And so, you know, in terms of mobilization of these policies and trying to ensure what it looks like, advocates are definitely leading the way and ensuring that you know, that there's an accounting and a demonstration of those benefits. And so I absolutely agree with what both Kizzy and Peggy said.
All right, thank you. I would like to re-emphasize something Ms. Guzman said. I am not studying anything with social injustice issues. I'm majoring in psychology and minoring in biology. I have nothing to do. But I feel like if we have the will, we could get involved. Right? If you want to make the change, we all should get involved and do what's right. I think, let's see if there's any more questions. Most of the questions are regarding on the Q&A sessions are about internships and opportunities. Let me remind you that this is being recorded, and our panelists did share about a lot of options for us to get involved. So we can just rewatch it. All right, I would like to thank our panelists for being here with us today. You guys are great. You are someone I look up to, and hopefully I will do great things like you one day.
You will. You totally will.
Thank you, everyone.
We need all of you. We absolutely need all of you. Thank you for having us, and you know, stay the path. Whether you're in biology, ecology, whatever your field is, economics, like environmental policy at the end should be and is often grounded in sound data. And I can't tell you how many city council meetings I've been to where you've had medical doctors testifying about the health effects of environmental inequality that they see in their emergency rooms and in their practices. So we need everybody, is the point. You need the professors, you need the academics, you need the researchers. So stay in school, kids, stay in school. You'll change lives.
Thank you. I think I just wanted to just quickly mention, I know that there's been a lot of questions about internships. They are, I mean, when I was studying, I definitely didn't have a paid internship. And so that, I kind of paid to travel to go and do the internship, but they are paid internships at the Power Authority. We are creating paid internships for high school students as well to try and make sure that they're exposed and get the skills to be able to work in the clean energy technology. So go on our website, apply for the internships. And as I said, one of the things that I just really wanted to quickly mention is that over the next 10 years, 30% of utility and energy workers are slated to retire. And we know that it's not been a very diverse workforce. And so we want to make sure that as we build this new career path and with professionals working in engineering and in energy, that they're reflective of the communities that host these facilities. And so that they're women, that they're people of color, and that we make sure that if we're at the table, then we can influence the implementation of these policies. So thank you.
And so thank you all. And I would just say that please go to our website, weact.org, and sign up for internships. We do not have the resources of the public authority, but we do pay a small stipend. But we'd love to talk to you about internships as well. And again, listen to Kizzy and get active, join something, volunteer. We need all of you to be part of the solution.